Welcome to the ECS Podcast. I'm Rocky Calvo, Executive Director of the Electrochemical Society. The purpose of this podcast is to connect the dots between the sciences, our everyday lives, and the sustainability of the planet. Dr. Harry Atwater is a scientist on the forefront of alternative energy technologies. From artificial photosynthesis to photovoltaic technology, his work is dedicated to the development of efficient, low-cost electrochemical energy devices to help address the energy crisis and secure a sustainable future. Currently, Dr. Atwater is the Howard Hughes Professor of Applied Physics and Materials Science at the California Institute of Technology and Director of the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis. He and his group at Caltech have been involved in photovoltaic research for more than 20 years and have developed such novel innovations as the silicon wire array solar cell. He will be delivering a talk about the progress and prospects of artificial photosynthesis at the 5th International ECS Electrochemical Energy Summit, taking place October 12th through the 14th this year in Phoenix, Arizona. Dr. Atwater, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Well, you're quite accomplished, and I haven't even gone into your list of awards that we've seen from you, but as a professor at now the top-ranked technical research institute in the world for the 5th year in a row, I thought I'd throw that plug in there. I saw that in the Times Higher Education just yesterday, as a matter of fact. Yeah, so congratulations to you and all the faculty there. That is really quite an honor to be able to hold that title for 5 years in a row. So you're there, you've arrived, you've accomplished quite a bit. We'd like to start this, though, by taking it back to what your first interest in science was and where it came from and how you developed that interest.
Yeah, well, I was one of these unfair people that had an unfair advantage early in life in the sense that my father was also a physics professor, so I was an apple that didn't fall far from the tree. Maybe that something that might be more apropos of the conversation today is, so why am I dedicating a significant part of my career and effort to renewable energy? And that stems from my early experiences in school as a school student growing up in Pennsylvania during the mid and late 1970s. So that was the time, of course, of the first so-called energy crisis in the United States, when the Arab countries formed a cartel that embargoed energy exports to the United States, and there were oil shortages. And I recall very vividly as a grade school and high school student having to wait for odd-even gas rationing in order to refuel our cars. And in fact, I also recall an episode where our school was shut down for a period during the month of January. The details I'm foggy on, but either because we ran out of fuel or because it was too expensive. But in either case, it had the same effect. And I thought to myself, these are pretty life-changing consequences, how we produce and use energy. And if I ever had a chance to do something about it, I would dedicate some effort to that. And so that's kind of where my interest began. And I was lucky enough in going in the direction of engineering to be able, and physical sciences, to be able to apply some of those ideas at a more fundamental level.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have a couple of Pennsylvania guys here in the room. Rob Girth, the producer, and myself are both from Pennsylvania, and I see from your bio that we're pretty close in age. So I have to tell you, I had the same experiences. It didn't lead me in the same direction, but I remember in the gas lines, waiting in the gas lines myself. What part of Pennsylvania did you grow up in?
So my family I grew up in State College, Pennsylvania, home of Penn State University.
Sure. Well, you just beat me to about 3 or 4 of my questions, too. So that's where your interest started in solar energy. You took that to a higher level, obviously. You went to MIT. And can you describe how your educational experience there had influences on your career in science and continued this development?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough during my time at MIT to get involved in a project on thin film semiconductor growth, for which one of the big application areas was in thin film solar cells. And so I learned a lot about the then, what was really the first generation of thin film solar technology, and silicon solar technology, and we were able to make some prototype cells. And that really stimulated my thinking about solar energy in particular.
And your work on thin film photovoltaics has received a lot of attention and is looked at by many as the future of solar cell panels. What makes it so special? What can you tell us about it?
Well, I think what you have to do is when you look at solar energy and energy as a whole, you have to look at the overall evolution of the technology and the demand cycle and so forth. So, shortly after I graduated from MIT, during the time I was a graduate student at MIT, we went through a period where we were living in a period of very, very inexpensive fossil energy. In fact, we're sort of now back in a period like that right now. So, nonetheless, many of the basic needs for renewable energy many of the basic needs were articulated during that first energy crisis period, and in particular, the first development of a photovoltaics technology, crystalline silicon wafer-based solar cell technology that is now the pervasive, ubiquitous manufacturing scale technology for solar photovoltaics today. It was really born at the R&D phase back then. And in fact, it takes some period of time during which technology is developed and then goes through the development and deployment phase, and you finally get to manufacturing. And today we have a solar industry that's really become a serious industry. It's no longer the niche boutique industry that I recall from the mid to late 90s, but it's become now the largest optoelectronic industry in the world. In fact, just this year it's surpassed the flat panel display industry in terms of optoelectronic technology that's manufactured in the world in terms of its overall turnover. What we saw as a possibility in starting in the early to mid 2000s was that silicon technology was going to really be the first wave of large-scale manufactured photovoltaics, but that there was so much greater opportunity. And the greater opportunities are always going to lie at higher efficiencies because, and what we've seen over the last decade is that's been borne out by the progress of technology and manufacturing is that it's become a very mature industry in the sense that the costs have dropped dramatically to the point where solar energy, in fact, I just saw this morning that the Department of Energy has done a study that indicates that the average levelized cost of electricity in the United States for solar right now is 5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a remarkable number considering where we started, and that's almost at parity with the cost of electricity from fossil fuel generated sources. But to go further in solar energy, you really have to look at materials that have intrinsic potential for higher efficiency, and so we started a company, myself and my co-founder Eli Yablanovich from University of California, Berkeley, in 2007 and 2008 called Alta Devices that developed the first thin-film gallium arsenide solar cell technology based on a removable substrate technology called epitaxial liftoff. And that process yielded world record single-junction solar cells with one sun efficiency of 28.8%. In fact, that technology is currently going into the manufacturing phase right now. So it's taken, almost 9 years or so since we started that company, and it's just now moving to manufacturing. So it always takes a while. So in the lab right now at Caltech and with the collaborators that we work with, we're looking towards even higher efficiencies. We're looking to go to technologies that split the solar spectrum into their different spectral bands, so as to more efficiently convert the sun's energy to electricity without so-called thermalization losses or loss of the excited carriers into heat. At the same time, one of the things that we've seen in the last few years is that solar electricity is starting to dominate the starting to dominate the added capacity. In fact, last year, 36% of the new added electric generation capacity in the United States was solar, which is remarkable. It was more than the amount that was added in nuclear, more than the amount that was added in wind. Tremendous amount of added capacity. The total volume, of course, is still small, but the rate of growth is very high at the moment because of the dramatic cost reductions. what that has pointed out is that the challenges and possibly some limitations of solar, which of course has to do with the fact that solar cannot inherently store the electricity that's generated in a solar photovoltaic cell. You have to use it at the time that it's generated, but it's an intermittent source, of course, predictably intermittent because of the nighttime, but unpredictably intermittent because of changeable local weather patterns. So that really has driven the chemical scientists to join into the game to really think about ways that we can generate directly chemical fuels from sunlight. And I think that's a very, very compelling direction to go because while the intermittency may, in the end, limit the degree to which solar photovoltaics could be incorporated into the grid, if we could really make storable solar energy, then there would be essentially fungibility or equivalence between the fuels that we use today to power our transportation fleet and heat our homes and so forth, and solar renewably generated fuels. Of course, it's easy to say that, but if you could achieve that missionary objective, that would be truly transformative. And so that's where JCAP comes in. JCAP is really dedicated, it's the Solar Fuels Hub, dedicated towards building integrated solar fuels generators and focusing on building prototypes that generate renewable solar fuels.
The objective is to find the perfect solar fuel cell.
So maybe I can just take a minute and say a little bit about the sort of arc of history with JCAP, and that JCAP started in 2010, and in fact was an initial 5-year investment by the Department of Energy that has just come to its completion, and the initial phase of JCAP during that 5 years was focused on hydrogen generation, building an integrated solar fuels generator that can split water into hydrogen and oxygen and separate the fuel products of the hydrogen and oxygen in a way that the hydrogen could be used as a storable chemical fuel. And I'm happy to say that JCAP has been able to really deliver on the initial conceptual, what was then a very audacious challenge to build an integrated solar fuels generator that is an order of magnitude more efficient than natural photosynthesis. So we've recently been able to show stable prototypes made with earth-abundant components that can operate at more than 10% efficiency. And that's been quite a landmark. And so we're not there, of course, in terms of building a fully cost-effective device, and that's going to take some added development work. But the initial investment at the hub scale has yielded at least prototype solar fuels generators that are capable of that kind of efficiency.
We were interested in having you participate in our 5th International Electrochemical Energy Summit because of your work at JCAP, and I assume that that's what you're going to be talking about at our coming meeting.
Right.
It would, I think, be valuable to know just a little bit more about JCAP's origins. So how did JCAP come to be? What was the seed?
What happened was over the course of the last 20 years or so, there has been an active community of electrochemists and photochemists who have looked at the opportunity of doing renewable fuel generation by electrochemical means. But there was no large-scale and systematic and organized and targeted effort, really, I would say. And my Caltech colleague Nate Lewis brought together a coalition of scientists working towards this objective. Actually, it was a challenge that was set out more than 25 years ago by Melvin Calvin, the Nobelist known for his insights about the Calvin cycle, who really issued a challenge to work on solar fuels as a real targeted objective in the chemistry community. And it took that period of time before a large-scale investment was made, in this case by the Department of Energy. And that brought together teams that had already begun to work in those areas, both at the California Institute of Technology, where I am, Nate Lewis and myself and Harry Gray and others, together with a group that had a similar focus at the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, LBNL. And that was essentially the genesis of JCAP that began work on this area to identify both the materials and components, but also the device designs to build real integrated solar fuels generators. So one thing I should mention also is that JCAP is currently undergoing a pretty significant transition. Today, as we speak, October 1st is the very first day of our 5-year renewal, as it so happens. So JCAP has been renewed for another 5 years by the Department of Energy.
Wow.
After an evaluation of the initial 5 years of progress. We're, of course, really delighted about that. But in its renewal, we've decided to go in a distinctly different technical direction, still focused on solar fuels, but really focused on what I regard as kind of one of the grand prizes here, which is to develop a selective and efficient electrochemical process for carbon dioxide reduction. A lot of the focus in JCAP over the last 5 years has been on hydrogen generation, and that's, of course, one of the molecular hydrogen is a key input for many potential processes for making chemical, both commodity and specialty chemicals, as well as large-scale fuel generation. But as you know, we have a carbon dioxide problem. And so if there were a process by which, under mild conditions, that is very close to atmospheric pressure and very close to room temperature, one could use selective electrochemistry using heterogeneous catalysis and using potentials and power generated from the sun to selectively reduce carbon dioxide to a desired and specifically targeted fuel product, and specifically targeted in such a way that it would enable large-scale generation of transportation fuels. Of course, the big part of our economy where the use of fuel seems almost inevitable and irreplaceable is in transportation. It's very, very unlikely that anytime soon either of us is going to be getting on an either electric or nuclear-powered airplane. And for many long-haul vehicles, and very difficult to compete with chemical fuels in terms of energy density, cost, portability, and so forth. And we have, of course, a already existing fuel infrastructure for chemical fuels. And so if we could really close this carbon dioxide and carbon fuel cycle in a way, currently we have an open cycle. We take fossil fuels out of the ground, we refine them, and we combust them, and we emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Suppose we had a way of taking the combustion products, carbon dioxide, and turning them back into chemical fuels. That would be a really transformative event for humanity, and it's a very, by the way, it's a very, very challenging event, a very challenging objective. At some level, it makes the process of electrochemical water splitting to make hydrogen look easy, because the problem with CO2 reduction, at least in the hands of mere mortals rather than nature, is that it's very difficult to direct it selectively towards specific products.
You've already begun to take us to really bigger picture questions that we had. So I want to keep the conversation going in that direction. What do you think about the trajectory of renewable energy?
Well, as I said, I think there's a fantastic contribution that's going to be made by solar photovoltaics and the dramatic cost reductions that have already been achieved. And some of the technologies that I talked about where we go to even higher efficiencies, what we call ultra-high efficiency photovoltaics in the neighborhood of 50% efficiency, those are going to really accelerate the insertion of, make solar energy be kind of an inevitable technology. However, the extent to which it actually inserts and embeds into the economy will depend directly on the ability to store that solar energy. You can store solar energy in many possible ways. You could pump water, you could store it underground in compressed air. but these are kind of civil engineering approaches to storage. And we, of course, also just incidentally and ubiquitously store energy in the form of chemical fuels. And so if we had a process for synthetically generating those chemical fuels directly by an elegant and selective electrochemical process, that would be something that would really be life-changing for everyone on Earth. It would be a huge, could potentially make a huge impact. For example, if you look at the overall distribution of the height, if you look at the number of tons of carbon we're putting into the air every year as a human species, we're emitting about 10 gigatons of carbon. And if you look at the large sources of carbon emissions, and then if you ask yourself what economically remunerative, in other words, what economically cost-effective process could you use to actually generate a product that has some economic value that could justify its renewable generation, then chemical liquid fuels for transportation look like a very attractive target because they offer, among all the possibilities ranging from specialty and commodity chemicals, polymers, and epoxies and industrial chemicals, all the way down to coal, they're sitting in a real sweet spot between the economic value in dollars per ton of carbon versus the volume of use in the economy. They both have a high enough value to be interesting as targets, and they're also used at a very, very large scale, which is not true for all of the specialty chemicals we use. Some of them have even higher values than liquid transportation fuels, but we don't use them at a big enough scale to impact our overall carbon emissions budget.
Yeah, so obviously you can be more optimistic about the trajectory if you have economic value as part of the formula. Yeah.
So that's one reason we have targeted in the JCAP renewable CO2 reduction products that could be potential inputs to the chemical fuels sector with an objective of developing things that would be renewable transportation fuels. And so because CO2 can be under catalytic conditions can be directed to many different products, the question of what you choose to make and why and how becomes a lot more complicated than the question of splitting water into oxygen and hydrogen. We know from 100 years of electrochemistry that the two outputs of that reaction are hydrogen and oxygen. You don't get anything else except as a parasitic byproduct of impure electrolytes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask you a question. Part of what I'm hearing from you is optimism about CO2 reduction, and we can address the climate problem. But then when you talk about it some more, I'm hearing like it's daunting, near impossible.
Well, let me. So I'm an optimist by nature because I've seen examples where this seemingly uneconomical and not very consequential technology called photovoltaics when I was a young person really came to fruition in a big way, and that's been enormously gratifying for me to see that. And I think that's a cycle we can repeat in the sense of taking the technology and the chemistry and the solid-state physics that we know, the know-how and the perspectives about manufacturability of things, and provide the technology options that would allow manufacturers and allow policymakers to drive us towards a renewable fuels industry. Now, I should say that JCAP is a program that is supported by the Basic Energy Sciences office in the Office of Science at DOE. So it is very much on the fundamental research end of DOE's portfolio, and appropriately so, because there are very fundamental basic science challenges which in the parlance of the investment represent high risk. So I don't think it's by any means a sure thing that we're going to be able to do it, to be able to develop selective, efficient catalytic routes for CO2 reduction. But I think that a very compelling case can be made for for making an investment, trying to accelerate our progress there. Because if we could do it, it would be so so consequential that it would be everyone would agree in retrospect that it would have been worth doing.
Wow, that's makes me positive. So thank you for that. I got we got a little bit off track on my my series of questions here, and I'd like to come back to, because part of what we're trying to do here is just share a little bit about you and your experience and
right.
how you got to be so accomplished. So would you mind sharing just a little bit about maybe some of the people that you learned from, some of the influences, I guess starting back at MIT?
Sure, yeah. So I owe a great debt of gratitude to my graduate advisor, who I'll be lucky enough to see this weekend, Professor Hank Smith at MIT. Hank was the sort of person who could really engage on the technical details that were required to, create all the criteria for success or failure of a technology, but also had a very, sort of overarching vision of where he was trying to go. He's widely known as the pioneer of X-ray lithography, and built one of the first nanostructures labs in the world at MIT. And so before nanotechnology was a big thing, we were working on nanostructure synthesis in the mid and late 1980s at MIT, and so that was due to the vision of Hank. And so I owe an awful lot to him. I had the good fortune to learn from a chemist and material scientist, David Turnbull, who was a faculty member at Harvard. He had been a chemist at General Electric, actually, where he worked on a number of chemical synthesis and material science research issues, and is well known for applying chemical rate theory to transformations in materials. And I can't also go without saying that in the solar energy arena, I have been both inspired and also had, lucky enough to count as a valued colleague, my friend Eli Yablonovich from Berkeley, who has developed a lot of fundamental ideas on solar energy conversion, and who is, even today still very active in this field, and who I'm lucky enough to have counted as a long-term collaborator.
Mm-hmm. What about, well, you mentioned a few colleagues from Caltech, but as I mentioned earlier, with the recognition and the rating that you've been getting, you really have it going on at Caltech. Are there other people there?
Oh yeah, so I have many people who are inspirational at in inspiring me. I'm inspired by all of my colleagues every day, and we of course have among our researchers in JCAP, we count Nate Lewis, who I mentioned before, who was the person who started the JCAP story. Harry Gray, who is an inorganic chemist, has long been focused on this area of solar fuels and solar energy at Caltech, well known. And in fact, one of our principal investigators, just down in the trenches scientist, is my friend Bob Grubbs, who's a Nobelist in chemistry here as well. So I'm lucky enough to have quite a team working alongside with everyone at JCAP. So it's a fantastic team.
I have to throw out a name because earlier in my career, I've been here at ECS a long time. We had the experience of having Rudy Marcus presenting a paper at our meeting, and the announcement of the Nobel Prize came out. Did you have any interaction with Rudy Marcus?
Oh, well, I think anybody who's ever thought about chemical rate theory has had an interaction with Rudy Marcus. But so I haven't worked closely with Rudy. I know him. We've served on a number. We've co-advised a number of students together, and but of course he's had a enormous impact on the way everyone thinks about chemical reactions.
Mm-hmm. As we're getting closer to the end of this, I'd like to Well, first say congratulations. You were talking about the company that you have formed and that you're ready to go to manufacturing with a phenomenal solar cell, right? So, because I was going to ask you next about career highlights. So I'm sure that's one of them. Are there others?
Yeah, I think that was enormously inspiring. One of the things I learned in that process was, well, first of all, what it's like to start a company in Silicon Valley. And also I learned that opened me up to a whole world of people outside the basic science arena who are incredibly valuable and incredibly good at what they do, which is, for example, if you know the person that can take an idea that you sketch on a whiteboard and turn it into a piece of process equipment that builds does a certain process step, that person is worth more than a Nobel Prize winner when you're trying to actually build a solar manufacturing process. And so I gained a real sincere appreciation for people, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, technologists, electrical engineers who are able to have this absolute genius of ability to take ideas at the conceptual R&D stage and imagine how you would actually turn them into sort of manufacturing concepts. And that's really significantly influenced my thinking about the kinds of things that are worth doing, actually.
Right.
Has completely changed sort of my outlook on the problems that I choose to get involved in. So I think, of course, in academia, I acknowledge some of the people who are my colleagues and my academic forebears, and I have to say that our biggest product in academia is students, and so many of my proudest moments are seeing my students graduate and seeing them go on and do great things in the solar energy field and in the optical sciences field where I work, and so that's of course enormously gratifying.
Well, I think we can all appreciate the work that you've been doing and that of your students too. Your contributions to renewable energy and hopefully helping the planet sustainability are significant. The last thing is really to give you an opportunity to share with us some of your final thoughts about anything at all.
Well, so given that opportunity, let me just say that. Let me sort of be a campaigner for the notion that investments in science are really critical for the United States and for the world. The United States, of course, is a world leader in development of ideas. We're lucky enough to be cited here at Caltech as being a leader in R&D. But those advantages come from the investments that were made by earlier generations of people who saw that as being important. When I look ahead to the future, I sometimes worry that we're going to lose collectively the will in the United States to make those bold investments. So I hope that we're able to continue to muster the will collectively, and that I think together with that goes the responsibility of scientists to explain why those investments are so important. I think that's important for the future of science, for the future of things like the Electrochemical Society and all of its members and so forth. And I think we're at a time where we're kind of at a watershed moment. The actual overall funding available from the federal government for science and technology R&D funding at universities and so forth actually is now it hit a high water mark about 2 years ago and is slowly going down. Whereas, for example, other countries in the world are beginning to ramp up their investments dramatically. And I hope that we are able to, in the United States, maintain a sense of priority and also be able to articulate clearly the benefits of those investments in science going forward.
Why do you think there has been a decline in those investments?
Well, I think part of it is there's no one source that you can point at. I think the way we do budgeting in the United States is complex, but frankly, a lot of our federal budget goes to things that are what we call the mandatory side of the budget, things like Social Security and health care benefits and so forth. And all of scientific research is in what's called the, quote, discretionary part of the budget. So those are the things that end up getting put into the trade space when the budget appropriators have to make decisions. And, I think we have to just make sure that we're very clear about articulating why we're doing this. I had the experience, along with some of the hub directors, of going up to Capitol Hill this summer and testifying to the House Science and Technology Committee about the investments in the energy innovation hubs and why we think they make sense. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad, I was really gratified to hear support from the committee, and I think we just need to make that broader message so that everyone understands that these are wise investments for the future for the whole country.
Well, we certainly appreciate you saying that here. I think that's partially what we're trying to do with these podcasts, and it's important statements that you made. So thanks for sharing that.
My pleasure.
And I think that just about brings us to the end of this. So I want to thank you again. It's really the things you shared today. I think it makes for a tremendous podcast for us, and the way you concluded it, I think is very important to have said those comments. So we really appreciate that you joined us today. And well, thank you, Harry Atwater, for joining us today. Listen to more episodes of our podcast by searching ECS Podcasts on iTunes, or just go to our website at electrochem.org. You can also find ECS on Twitter at ECS.org. Thanks for joining us today.